September 3, 1944. Camp Clarinda, Iowa. In a small-town movie theater that smells of popcorn and polished wood, 40 German prisoners of war sit in cushioned seats, staring at a silver screen where Charlie Chaplin stumbles through the antics of the great dictator. The irony is so thick it feels suffocating. Outside, American farmers tend their crops under a peaceful sky. 3,000 miles away, their families huddle in bomb shelters as Allied aircraft reduce German cities to rubble. Dear brother Ernst, the enemy took us to the movies today. We saw Hollywood while our cities burned. I laughed at Charlie Chaplin's caricature of our Führer while knowing that mother and father might be dead under the ruins of Hamburg. The Americans sat beside us, sharing their popcorn, as if we were neighbors at a Sunday matinee rather than prisoners and captors in the middle of a world war. The letter was written by Hauptmann Wolfgang Richter, a Wehrmacht artillery officer captured in Normandy and transported to one of dozens of prisoner camps scattered across rural America. His words reveal one of the war's most bizarre contradictions. While Europe tore itself apart in an orgy of violence and destruction, German prisoners in America were experiencing a strange parallel universe of abundance, entertainment, and surreal normalcy. This letter, discovered in 1993 in the Richter family archives in Bavaria, exposes the psychological warfare of American soft power, how Hollywood movies, abundant food, and democratic freedoms were used as weapons more devastating than bullets or bombs. It reveals how America defeated Nazi ideology not through torture or brutality, but through the simple, overwhelming demonstration of a society so prosperous it could afford to entertain its enemies. Don't let history be forgotten. Subscribe so more people hear these forbidden voices. Wolfgang Richter's letter begins with descriptions that would have seemed like enemy propaganda to anyone reading them in wartime Germany. His observations about American prisoner treatment reveal a systematic approach to psychological transformation that Nazi leadership had never anticipated or prepared to counter. The guards told us we were going to town for cultural education, he writes. I expected political lectures or propaganda films about American superiority. Instead, they loaded us onto buses, real buses with cushioned seats and windows, and drove us to what they called a picture show. Brother, imagine my confusion when we pulled up to a building with bright lights spelling out Bijou Theater and posters advertising the latest Hollywood productions. The cultural re-education programs implemented in American POW camps represented a sophisticated understanding of how entertainment could achieve political objectives that direct indoctrination could not. Rather than attempting to argue Germans out of Nazi beliefs, American authorities exposed them to alternative visions of society that made those beliefs seem primitive and absurd. Wolfgang's letter documents his first encounter with American popular entertainment and the cognitive dissonance it created. His descriptions reveal a man struggling to reconcile Nazi teachings about American decadence with evidence of cultural sophistication and social organization that exceeded anything he had experienced in Germany. The theater was more elegant than any concert hall I remember from Berlin, he writes. Velvet seats, ornate decorations, and a screen larger than I imagined possible. But it wasn't the physical grandeur that shocked me. It was the casual way Americans treated such luxury. For them, this was ordinary entertainment on an ordinary Saturday night. For us, it was proof that America possessed resources so abundant they could be wasted on pleasure while fighting a global war. Camp Clarinda housed approximately 3,000 German prisoners in a facility that included not only basic housing and mess halls, but also recreational facilities, educational classrooms, and even a small theater for camp productions. The movie outings to downtown Clarinda represented the camp administration's commitment to exposing prisoners to American civilian society in controlled but meaningful ways. Military records from the camp, declassified in the 1980s, reveal the strategic thinking behind these cultural programs. Camp commanders understood that direct confrontation with Nazi ideology would likely strengthen prisoner resistance, while exposure to American prosperity and democratic values might achieve voluntary conversion through demonstration rather than argumentation. Wolfgang's letter provides a prisoner's perspective on how this strategy worked in practice. His observations reveal the psychological impact of witnessing American abundance and social organization that contradicted every Nazi teaching about enemy society and military capability. They showed us the great dictator, He writes, Charlie Chaplin's mockery of our Führer and everything we were taught to revere. I should have been offended, angry, loyal to the man I had sworn to serve. Instead, I found myself laughing. Brother, I laughed at Adolf Hitler. Not because the Americans forced me to, but because Chaplin's portrayal revealed truths about power and authority that I had never been allowed to see. Chaplin's film, released in 1940, had been banned throughout Nazi-controlled Europe precisely because of its devastating satirical attack on Hitler and fascist ideology. For German prisoners, seeing the film represented their first exposure to critical perspectives on Nazi leadership that had been completely suppressed in their homeland. Wolfgang's response to the film reveals the power of satire to penetrate ideological defenses that logical arguments might not breach. Humor can reveal absurdities that serious discourse might leave intact, creating psychological space for doubt and reconsideration. The final speech in the film left me shaken. Wolfgang continues in his letter. Chaplin's plea for human kindness, for democracy, for ordinary people to reject the machinery of hate and fear. These words felt like revelations after years of being told that strength came through submission to authority and hatred of enemies. I wanted to stand up and applaud, but I looked around at my fellow prisoners and saw the same confusion and recognition in their faces. The collective experience of watching anti-Nazi entertainment with fellow prisoners created opportunities for shared doubt and discussion that individual propaganda consumption could not achieve. The social dimension of movie-going allowed German POWs to discover that their growing skepticism about Nazi ideology was shared rather than treasonous. Wolfgang's letter documents the broader context of American entertainment that prisoners encountered during their cinema visits. Beyond the specific anti-Nazi content, they were exposed to Hollywood's portrayal of American values, social relationships, and cultural priorities that offered stark contrasts to Nazi ideology. Before the main feature, they showed us something called newsreels, he writes, but these weren't like the propaganda reels we saw in German cinemas. American newsreels showed both victories and defeats, both heroic actions and ordinary soldiers doing mundane jobs. They showed American women working in factories, African soldiers fighting alongside whites, and even criticism of government policies. Brother, imagine news that admits uncertainty and criticism rather than proclaiming inevitable victory. Wolfgang's exposure to American journalism through movie theater newsreels provided education about democratic media practices that contrasted sharply with Nazi information control. The willingness of American media to acknowledge setbacks and criticize government decisions demonstrated confidence and transparency that fascist systems could not match. The letter reveals Wolfgang's growing awareness of American material abundance through the simple experience of movie theater concessions and civilian consumption that surrounded the entertainment experience. They sold food in the theater lobby, he writes with obvious amazement. Popcorn, candy, soft drinks. Luxury items that we hadn't seen in Germany for years, available to ordinary civilians as casual purchases. Children spent more money on movie snacks than German families had for weekly groceries. The abundance was almost obscene, except that everyone seemed to take it for granted. Wolfgang's observations about American consumer culture reveal the success of wartime production in maintaining civilian morale and demonstrating national strength. The ability to provide entertainment and luxury goods while fighting a global war sent powerful messages about American industrial capacity and social organization. The letter documents Wolfgang's internal struggle between loyalty to Germany and growing recognition of American superiority in areas that Nazi propaganda had claimed as German strengths: organization, efficiency, cultural sophistication, and technological capability. I tried to maintain mental resistance, he confesses. I told myself this was enemy propaganda designed to weaken our resolve. But brother, how do you dismiss what you see with your own eyes? The theater was just one building in one small town, yet it surpassed anything we had in major German cities. If this was propaganda, it was propaganda backed by reality. Wolfgang's intellectual honesty about his changing perceptions reflects the psychological pressure created by direct exposure to evidence that contradicted fundamental beliefs about national superiority and enemy weakness. The cognitive dissonance created by such exposure often led to complete ideological conversion. The letter reveals Wolfgang's growing understanding of American democratic culture through observation of civilian behavior in the movie theater and surrounding community. His descriptions capture details about social interaction that revealed democratic values in practice. Americans of all ages and social classes sat together in the theater, he observes. Rich and poor, young and old, civilians and soldiers, all mixed together without the rigid hierarchy we were taught was necessary for social order. They disagreed openly about the films, laughed together at jokes, and treated each other with casual equality that would have been impossible in Germany. Wolfgang's observations about American social equality provided practical education about democratic principles that theoretical instruction could not match. Witnessing egalitarian behavior in action demonstrated possibilities for social organization that Nazi ideology had claimed were impossible. Support this work so the truth continues to reach people. The letter documents Wolfgang's participation in post-movie discussions with fellow prisoners that allowed processing of their shared cultural shock and ideological confusion. These conversations created space for collective doubt that individual reflection might not have achieved. After the film, we rode back to camp in unusual silence. Wolfgang writes, "Finally, Unteroffizier Schmidt asked what we were all thinking. How can they afford such luxury while fighting a war? Nobody had a good answer. Our propaganda had told us America was weak and divided, but everything we saw suggested strength and unity that exceeded our own." Wolfgang's account of prisoner discussions reveals the collective nature of ideological transformation that occurred in American POW camps. Individual doubt became shared recognition that Nazi teachings might be fundamentally flawed, creating group dynamics that reinforced rather than discouraged intellectual conversion. The letter reveals Wolfgang's growing concern about conditions in Germany based on American news reports and his own family's letters. The contrast between his comfortable captivity and his family's suffering created profound guilt and psychological conflict. "Your last letter mentioned the bombing of Hamburg," he writes to his brother. "You described families living in basements, children who have forgotten what milk tastes like, elderly people dying from cold and hunger. Brother, while you wrote those words, I was sitting in a heated theater eating chocolate candy and watching comedy films. How do I reconcile my comfort with your suffering?" Wolfgang's emotional struggle reflects the psychological complexity faced by prisoners who discovered they were better treated by enemies than their own government had ever treated them. This recognition often created lasting guilt that complicated post-war reintegration and family relationships. The letter documents Wolfgang's exposure to American perspectives on the war through Hollywood films that portrayed conflict in terms of democratic values versus totalitarian oppression, rather than national competition or racial superiority. "They showed us other films too," Wolfgang continues. "Movies about American soldiers fighting for freedom and democracy, about ordinary people resisting tyranny and oppression. These weren't just propaganda films. They were stories about human dignity and individual choice that made our own cause seem hollow and cruel. I began to understand why Americans fought with such determination. They weren't just defending territory, they were defending ideas." Wolfgang's recognition of American ideological motivation provided insight into democratic commitment that Nazi analysis had failed to understand or predict. The realization that Americans fought for principles rather than just national interests suggested depths of social organization that fascist systems could not match. The letter reveals Wolfgang's growing awareness of American racial tensions and social contradictions that complicated his increasingly positive assessment of democratic society. His observations about segregated seating and social restrictions reflected confusion about American inconsistencies. "I noticed that colored soldiers sat in a separate section of the theater," he writes. "This confused me because American propaganda emphasized equality and democracy, yet they seemed to practice their own form of racial separation. When I asked our guard about this, he looked uncomfortable and said it was complicated. Perhaps all societies have contradictions between their ideals and their practices." Wolfgang's observations about American racism provided nuanced understanding of democratic society that avoided both complete idealization and total rejection. His ability to recognize flaws while still appreciating strengths demonstrated sophisticated political thinking that transcended propaganda simplicities. The letter documents Wolfgang's participation in camp discussions about American entertainment and its political implications. These conversations revealed prisoner awareness that cultural exposure was intended to achieve political conversion, but also recognition that such conversion might be justified by observable evidence. We debated whether the Americans were trying to brainwash us. Wolfgang writes, some prisoners insisted that Hollywood films were just another form of propaganda designed to make us betray Germany, but others argued that calling something propaganda doesn't make it false. If American society really does offer more freedom and prosperity than our own, shouldn't we want to learn from it rather than resist it? Wolfgang's intellectual engagement with questions about propaganda and truth reflects successful American strategy that encouraged critical thinking rather than suppressing it. By allowing prisoners to debate and question, camp authorities demonstrated confidence in democratic ideas that contrasted with fascist information control. The letter reveals Wolfgang's growing understanding of American economic and social systems through exposure to consumer culture and civilian life that surrounded his entertainment experiences. The abundance here isn't just material, he reflects. It's intellectual and cultural too. The theater showed films from many different studios, with different perspectives and themes. Americans seem to have endless variety in their entertainment, their products, their ideas. In Germany, everything was standardized and controlled. Here, diversity seems to be a source of strength rather than weakness. Wolfgang's observations about American cultural diversity provided education about pluralistic society that contrasted sharply with Nazi emphasis on uniformity and central control. His recognition that variety could strengthen rather than weaken society represented fundamental ideological conversion. The letter documents Wolfgang's attempts to understand American military success through observation of civilian morale and social organization. His analysis revealed growing appreciation for democratic advantages that Nazi leadership had failed to recognize or prepare for. I'm beginning to understand why we're losing this war, he writes with startling honesty. It's not just about weapons or strategy, it's about the kind of society that can sustain such efforts. Americans fight from abundance while we fight from scarcity. They have reserves of material and morale that we've exhausted. Their prisoners go to movies while our children go to bomb shelters. Wolfgang's strategic analysis reflects sophisticated understanding of total war that transcended military technicalities to encompass social and economic foundations of national power. His recognition of American advantages suggested complete intellectual conversion from Nazi ideology. The letter reveals Wolfgang's growing concern about post-war Germany and his role in reconstructing a society that he now recognized as fundamentally flawed. His reflections revealed both hope for democratic transformation and anxiety about personal responsibility for Nazi crimes. What will happen to Germany when this war ends? He asks. How do we build a new society from the ruins of the old? I've seen what democracy can accomplish here in America, the prosperity, the freedom, the cultural vitality. Can we create something similar in Germany? Or are we doomed to remain prisoners of our own history and character? Wolfgang's questions about German reconstruction revealed sophisticated understanding of democratic transition challenges that would indeed dominate post-war European politics. His exposure to American society provided both inspiration and practical knowledge for future democratic development. The letter documents Wolfgang's personal transformation from Nazi officer to potential democratic citizen through exposure to American entertainment and civilian society. His evolving identity created psychological conflicts that reflected broader challenges of ideological conversion. I don't know who I am anymore, he confesses. I came here as a German officer loyal to the fatherland and the Führer. Now I question everything I was taught to believe. American movies have shown me possibilities for human society that I never imagined. How do I go home carrying such knowledge? How do I face family and friends who still believe in the cause I've abandoned? Wolfgang's identity crisis reflects the profound psychological impact of successful re-education programs that changed not just political opinions but fundamental worldviews. The transformation from fascist to Democrat required rebuilding personality and relationships around new values and priorities. The letter reveals Wolfgang's attempts to prepare psychologically for eventual repatriation while preserving democratic insights gained through American captivity. His planning reflected both hope for German democratization and fear of reverting to authoritarian patterns. "I'm trying to memorize everything I've learned here," he writes. "The way Americans organize their society, the way they treat disagreement and diversity, the way they balance individual freedom with collective responsibility. Maybe I can help rebuild Germany according to these principles if I survive to see peace." Wolfgang's commitment to democratic reconstruction illustrated successful American investment in prisoner re-education. His determination to spread democratic values in post-war Germany represented exactly the outcome that camp administrators had hoped to achieve through cultural exposure programs. The letter concludes with Wolfgang's most profound reflection on the contrast between his captivity experience and the reality of continued warfare. His final observations capture both gratitude for humane treatment and horror at the implications of American prosperity amid global destruction. "Tonight I sat in an American movie theater, eating candy and laughing at Charlie Chaplin's jokes while my homeland burned under Allied bombs," he writes. "The absurdity of this situation overwhelms me. I am fed, entertained, and educated by the same nation that is destroying my country. I am treated with more dignity by my captors than I ever received from my own commanders." Wolfgang's recognition of the paradox inherent in his situation reflects the psychological complexity created by humane treatment of enemy prisoners during active warfare. The contrast between American generosity toward prisoners and military devastation of Germany created cognitive dissonance that forced fundamental reconsideration of moral and political assumptions. The letter's final passage reveals Wolfgang's complete ideological transformation and his determination to carry democratic values back to Germany despite the personal risks involved. "Brother, I must tell you the truth even if it brands me a traitor," he concludes. "We have been fighting for the wrong side in this war. America represents everything we were told to hate: democracy, diversity, individual freedom, but these are not weaknesses. They are sources of strength that we could never match with our authoritarianism and racial hatred. If I survive this war, I will work to build a new Germany based on American principles rather than Nazi ideology. Subscribe so these forbidden stories don't vanish again." Wolfgang Richter's letter was never sent during the war due to postal restrictions, but he preserved it among his personal effects and eventually shared it with his family after repatriation in 1946. His brother Ernst, who survived the war and Soviet occupation, kept the letter as evidence of possibilities for democratic transformation that seemed impossible during the conflict's darkest years. Wolfgang returned to Germany in 1946 and settled in the American occupation zone, where he worked as a translator and cultural liaison for military government offices. He used his English language skills and understanding of American society to facilitate communication between occupation authorities and German civilians. He married in 1948 and raised 2 children who became active supporters of democratic institutions and transatlantic cooperation. The letter was donated to the German Federal Archives in 1994, along with other family papers documenting the post-war period. Wolfgang's testimony has since been incorporated into educational programs about denazification, cultural transformation, and the role of entertainment in political change. Dr. Michael Harrison, a historian who specializes in prisoner of war experiences, explains the significance of Wolfgang's account. His letter provides unique documentation of how American soft power operated during World War II. The decision to expose prisoners to Hollywood entertainment wasn't just humanitarian. It was strategic psychological warfare that achieved better results than torture or indoctrination. The broader historical context reveals the systematic nature of American cultural re-education programs that used entertainment, education, and exposure to civilian society to achieve ideological transformation among German prisoners. Of the approximately 380,000 German POWs held in the United States, the vast majority returned to Germany with positive attitudes toward democratic values and American society. Post-war surveys conducted by American intelligence agencies found that former prisoners were significantly more likely than other Germans to support democratic institutions, oppose extremist movements, and favor cooperation with Western allies. This outcome validated the investment in cultural exposure programs while contributing to successful German democratization. Wolfgang's letter serves as testament to the power of entertainment and popular culture to transcend political boundaries and create opportunities for ideological transformation. His experience suggests that democratic values can be transmitted through cultural exposure more effectively than through direct political instruction or coercion. The document challenges traditional assumptions about propaganda and cultural influence by demonstrating how authentic artistic expression can achieve political objectives that deliberate propaganda might not accomplish. Charlie Chaplin's humor succeeded where political arguments might have failed because it appealed to universal human experiences rather than partisan loyalties. Wolfgang's testimony also provides historical perspective on contemporary debates about cultural diplomacy and soft power in international relations. His positive response to American entertainment suggests that cultural exchange can build bridges between societies even during active military conflict. The letter has influenced modern military training programs that emphasize cultural awareness and public diplomacy as components of effective strategy. Wolfgang's transformation demonstrates that winning hearts and minds can achieve more durable victories than purely military approaches to conflict resolution. Educational institutions have incorporated Wolfgang's letter into curricula dealing with media studies, cultural history, and international relations. His personal account provides concrete illustration of abstract concepts about cultural influence and ideological change through entertainment exposure. The document serves as a reminder that individual experiences matter within larger historical processes, that cultural products can carry political significance beyond their creators' intentions, and that entertainment can provide venues for encountering different ways of organizing society and understanding human relationships. Wolfgang Richter's voice speaks across the decades, carrying testimony about unexpected cultural encounters in the midst of global warfare, about discovering humanity through artistic expression, about finding hope in enemy territory. His letter preserves evidence that even total war cannot completely destroy possibilities for cultural exchange and ideological transformation. The letter's enduring message transcends its specific historical context to illuminate broader questions about culture, politics, and human connection. Wolfgang's experience suggests that laughter can be more subversive than violence, that entertainment can achieve what force cannot, and that cultural understanding can bridge even the deepest political divisions. His final reflection captures the profound irony that defined his entire captivity experience. In the enemy's cinema, watching the enemy's films, eating the enemy's food, I discovered truths about human dignity and social organization that my own society had hidden from me. For some, it was laughter in the darkness. For others, it was the verdict on an entire empire. For some, it was laughter in the darkness. For others, it was a verdict on an entire empire.